Hello, Joe.
Hello,
Really nice to
Lizzie.
meet you. Hi, and I'm so grateful for you doing this interview about Trevor's work, and it's really lovely to meet you virtually.
Pleasure.
It was really nice to see the article that you wrote about Trevor, and I wondered if you could let us know a bit more about how your paths crossed and how you first came across Trevor and his work.
I first became aware of Trevor's work, probably in the 90s, mid-90s. And I think it was probably at a show at Flowers Gallery in London. And I took away a postcard of, I think it's Jazz 3. And it was an etching with Sheen Colley, which I was very, very struck by. And I always had that in my room. And then in the early 2000s, I started to show with Flowers, and I came across Trevor's work a lot more, and I just always really felt a sense of, I loved his sense of balance and shape and calmness. And although his work now is very different from the early work in the 90s, I still feel it has that essential quality. And then also, Trevor and Carol both have spent a lot of time at Ballinglen, the Ballinglen Arts Foundation in County Mayo, Ireland. And I went over there in 2003. And I've been there several times since, and I know Trevor and Carol have. So we both very much have Ballinglen as our common. They were there at the same time as me in 2003, but I was pregnant at the time, so I was sort of hibernating as well as working, so I didn't really see them very much. But Trevor's work has always sort of had that sense that you get when you're over in Ballinglen, very quiet, very calm. So that's how we first sort of came across each other.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, it's nice, and also you're drawn together by the serenity of each other's work, and I noticed that that's obviously very sort of key to your work as well.
Yeah.
The sense of the minimalist approach. I'm just going to look at some of the sort of expand a bit on some of the questions that you asked Trevor in his printmaking, in the Printmaking Today piece.
Yeah.
In that article, which is available on our website, you asked Trevor about what place printmaking has in his expressive practice and how this role differs from his painting. And he responded that print is an integral part of his practice and part of his creative language, which relates to his painting, and mentioned that while he might create risks with his painting, the print process is inherently creates its own risks. And we wondered what you thought about that response and how perhaps it relates to your own experience as printmaker. And I think I might also bring in one of Trevor's questions to you at this point, which was that as a printmaker, you make drawings and also take photographs. And Trevor, I wanted to ask you whether you'd ever been interested in making paintings. So I thought those two came together.
In terms of the print, it's interesting that Trevor and I, we both have print, and I do have painting, in fact, because I did my first degree at Ruskin in painting. So I do paint and I do draw, but I don't very much now. Print has become a much bigger part of my practice, whereas with Trevor, I think it's the other way around. The paint, well, I don't know how the balance, but his painting is very primary to his work, and the print very much informs that and works alongside it. And I think the interesting thing for Trevor with his painting is that the painting for him is a slower process, and the print is a slightly more immediate process where he can sort of experiment. Whereas for me, it's the other way around. And I found painting too fast, and I couldn't, whereas for print for me is a slow process. And I think I've been thinking about this, and I think I mainly do etching and relief, which is a much slower type of work than the print that Trevor does. So Trevor is mono, screen print, and collage with his monoprint. And it's a more direct form of print, whereas for me, print is a slower process. And I think for me, that form of printmaking allows me time to think. So I think what's common in both myself and Trevor is needing a time to process and to think. and how we use the print is slightly different, and how we use it as a medium in our practice is slightly different. I know that there are quite a lot of printmakers who do see process, because the printmaking is a vast field, and some forms of printmaking are very heavily process based. And I think that allows time to think, to do one stage, stop, think, do another stage.
Well, he does say in the article that it's very much a to and fro.
Very much a
to and fro process.
Yes, and I think that is common between us, because I think Trevor does like that sort of. It allows him to. It makes him do something and then think, oh yes, now can I change that? And I think what's really common between us is the experiment and the idea that something can happen and you don't quite know what's going to happen, and then it can throw a whole other set of circumstances in front of you. And there's that element of unpredictability about print that we both find quite exciting in work, because I never quite know what's going to happen when I bring a plate out of the acid. And similarly, I think with Trevor, he likes that sense that he talks about it, he might create risks through the print. So yes, and in answer to Trevor, yes, I do paint and I do draw. I do large drawings sometimes, but I tend not to show people.
Okay. Right. It's the private practice, which is fair enough. Yeah. And there was sort of following on from that. So yeah, I think I was saying how printmaking is important to both of your practices, and it seems to me that printmaking has a similar part to play in Trevor's work, which is what we were saying, and it's integral part of his practice. I think my question was, can you help us understand what it is that does dictate the expression when you're printmaking? What it is that you're sort of, these factors you're talking about, the chance, but what is it that you're really looking to accentuate, and that printmaking does for you, which isn't maybe just chance? Is there anything else that you find in the sort of in the visual impression or the actual work itself, the end result, that you find is really enhanced by print and it cannot be realized in any other medium?
I think for me, it's the mark, it's the quality of the mark that I can achieve through print. Like I say, I mainly do intaglio, etching and relief. And there's something about the quality of the mark that I can make in a print that it just excites me. It makes me, it's a physical relationship that I have with the material that I work on, whether it's wood or metal. And that physicality of process echoes for me, the physicality of being in a landscape, for example, because my work is sort of embodied in a landscape. And a few years ago, I did a project which was working on a 10-acre field where I was asked to seed the field. Long story, but the project itself was very informing to my print work. And I was quite intrigued by that link between how you make a mark and the physicality of how you convey what the feeling of being in a landscape for me in that case. And there was a parallel world going on between my working physically in a field and sewing and looking at how things grow, with working on an etching plate and being in my studio and having an etching needle and working with the acid. So it was quite intriguing, and that mark making and the physicality of cutting into wood as doing relief prints. And it's that delicacy that you can bring and tie through. And I'm sure for Trevor, that for him, in my as an outsider looking at his work, it's that it's the colour and the layers of the colour, and how that for him echoes a sense of place, a building, a piece of music, and it
Yes.
becomes a tangible visual material. It becomes a
Absolutely.
visual language.
Well, I mean, personally, I think printmakers and people who engage with print are so incredibly talented to be able to translate the outside world and their innermost thoughts into this medium. I think it's it's an incredible medium. I'm always so amazed by the results that I see. It brings something you just said brings me on to another question from Trevor. You touched on music, and he says, I associate strongly with the rhythms and patterns in your work. Do you actively engage with music as an influence? That's a question from Trevor.
Yeah, the short answer is no.
Okay.
Because no, music doesn't play a part in what I do. But I was thinking about this, and people do ask me this, and for me, it's a rhythm because I think it's not just the music, it's the rhythm. And for me, I walk a lot when I'm outside. So I go outside and I walk a lot. And it might be just the same walk every day or different walks, but I think that rhythm comes into the work. And
So rhythm is
it's a different
rhythm,
type.
opposed to Trevor's, which is his amazing music.
So it's not music as such, and I don't listen when I'm working, but I might listen to music when I'm walking, or just the walking. And also language is a rhythm to me. So poetry, reading words, to me they have a form, and they have their own music. So that's how that very much weaves into what I do. And
interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And actually, I'm going to go to Trevor's other question for you. He says, Jo draws her inspiration from nature, landscape, and specific locations. These are the things that influence me too. We've both worked at the Ballington, I probably said it wrong, Ballinglen Foundation, which you mentioned earlier, in County Mayo. Did working on the Royal Atlantic coast feed into your prints?
Yeah, I think that's a really strong link with our work. Because for me, the West Coast areas of England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland have played an enormous part in my work. In fact, I did a project about 5-6 years ago, which was based on all the West Coast regions of Scotland and Morecambe Bay, which is when you go out into Morecambe Bay, it's a very remote landscape. And linking it in with Ballinglen, I think it's that immensity. And the project I did was called Literal, On the Edge. So that feeling of being on the edge, and the sort of enormity of sky, and the silence, even when there's a storm going on. It's very much a sort of common theme, I think, with
that stillness. I always feel like there's quite an amazing calm and stillness to Trevor's work, and maybe that's something you just mentioned, the sense of silence despite the storms. Maybe there's this overarching power that comes in from the landscape to the work.
It's the power of it, I think, and he'll know what I mean when I talk about Ballinglen and that power. And you see some of Trevor's photographs from his Irish paintings, and they just have that sense of enormity, and the sky and the sea and the quiet. It's very, very powerful place to be in. I think that's been an important part of, it seems to me to be an important part of Trevor's work, along with other places and architecture, etc. But
Interesting. Very, very good. Just onto some more sort of practical questions about printmaking. In the interview in Printmaking today, you asked Trevor about the collaborative process of his prints. And I wondered whether you're able to expand on how this works as a printmaker, and perhaps we could talk about some of the works in the exhibition. I don't know if you're familiar with the works Giant Step and Cascade, for example, which were made collaboratively with Kip Gresham. from the Cambridge print studio, but maybe you can talk us through how a collaborative process like that might actually work.
Yes, I mean, I've never worked with a printmaker. I've worked as a printmaker, helping. I worked with Helen Chadwick to edition some work, but which was quite interesting as a printmaker, being on the other side, helping an artist to, manifest some work that they had in their head. But I've never worked as a printmaker with a print studio. I think it's quite an interesting relationship, and I think for Trevor it definitely seems to be something that must be quite exciting and quite challenging, because you've suddenly got someone suggesting different media, different ways of doing things technically, which must push the boundaries of your work. Because I think as an artist, I'm generalizing here, but often we work, it's quite a solitary occupation. You work on your own and you have to push yourself. And I think you have to push your own boundaries somehow, whether that's something you're looking at, something that you're reading, but often it's being in situations that make you try different things. And I can see that working collaboratively with another printmaker really does help you to think differently and push your ways of working. And I can see that with Trevor, it's obviously, well, I say obviously, from what he says, it does seem that he comes back and he can take that into his own studio. So work that he does with Kip Gresham, for example, will be challenging his ways of working, and then he can come back to the studio and experiment.
About the change in environment as well, and how that sort of informs the sort of a slight change in mood in the work. And I think you were saying even the journey going from his studio to Cambridge would have an effect on sort of what would happen when he got to the studio, because you have the experience of maybe getting on a bus in East London and absorbing all those influences and then arriving in Cambridge. And so yes, it must
because he's got those pieces. I really like Cambridge, the prints that he's got, the Cambridge prints, and it's quite interesting thinking about that, because you go into a particular mindset. You are saying, right, I'm going to go and do this piece of work, and just the whole rhythm of that, and getting to work and getting to the place of work.
Right.
And I think it's interesting looking at the work in the exhibition and seeing the contrast between some of the pieces, because he's got which were the ones that he did in France that I particularly liked.
The landscape works, which are monoprints.
Yes. That's right, the block 3, was it block 3 and 5, I think? With, and they've just got that sort of energy. You can feel the energy that crackles from being in a place, which is very different to some of the work that's made in the studio. And then there'll be some work again, which he makes at another studio, say with Kip Gresham. And I think that will affect how the work, I would guess, Trevor might disagree, but I would think that will really feed into the work and how it comes through. I particularly like I've just written down the screen E and D. I thought those were very beautiful, just the luminosity that comes off those. Even on a screen, it's frustrating not being able to look at them in real life, but you can feel that the layers and layers that go into it, and the colour, and because Trevor manages to overlay colours but not make them muddy. They don't lose themselves. They sort of sing out, which I think is quite it's a quality of his work. The way
someone said to me that they liked the way there was all these shifting sort of undertones of the work, and then the sort of formal structure of the grid over the top, and that it was a good metaphor for these challenging times, actually, how things can be shifting beneath, and yet you need this sort of formality. But it was an interesting reading. I thought it was quite insightful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I really like the grids in Trevor's work because it's a containment, but there's all this activity that's going on, but quietly. Because I think Trevor stays somewhere, he wants his work to whisper.
Yes.
And I think it does. I think it has that. But whispering can be, because people have to listen very carefully when someone whispers. And I really like that idea that, yes, it does whisper, and the viewer has to just take note and listen quite carefully. And Trevor's work is making you do that. As a viewer, you have to come to it and stop and listen, which I really like.
Well, these are wonderful insights, Jo. I really appreciate you sharing with us your thoughts on Trevor and printmaking and this exhibition. And it's so kind of you to take part in this and to get to meet you. And I hope we'll meet again when this is all over in real life. And,
yes, that would be nice.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you again.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.